Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Unpacking Unpacking Mormonism. That's right, we're doing the other show, Unpacking Mormonism, with Sarah and Mason. We are very excited to be here today. The full name of our show is Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma with Sarah and Mason, and I totally fucked that up just now. So I know Mason is like, oh, whatever. We're good. All right, so we are talking today. For those of you who are listening, I just flipped Mason off just for kicks and giggles. So for those of you who are listening to today's show, we were wanting to tell you that the farm is going well. We should have our nonprofit status here in about 3 weeks. It took us a little while because we were moving and doing some other things in the meantime. And so I did a show. I believe it was last week, but go ahead and look for that. Alex will tag it as the farm update where we showed the animals and stuff. It was a lot of fun. I don't want to redo that here because I'm not going to walk around with my laptop, and I have to have the laptop in order for Mason and I to both be in the picture.
Also not why we're here.
Also not why we are here today. So Mason, why are we here today?
You tell me.
You tell me. Okay, that means he wasn't paying attention and doesn't know. Am I wrong?
Nope.
Okay.
You're not. Actually, yes, you're wrong. I know why we're here.
Oh, well then share.
We're here to talk about erasure.
Erasure, the erasure
of humanity. The way that communities, organizations, countries, other cultures erase people, erase groups, erase cultures.
Right. Business organizations. Like, this is not specific to religion.
Right. It happens all over the place. But of course, our experience is mostly with Mormonism.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we see it, recognize it. Of course, we've seen it other places. And sometimes it's happening. Sometimes it's completely unbeknownst to you.
Well, and I want to say that, like, during the time that I grew up in Mormonism, and I feel like a portion of me was erased, it was also supported by society. Like, it was the social norms at the time, right, which is another reason why it was so effective. And so the title today, we got it wrong when we loaded up, but we are talking today about the erasure of humanity. And I created a meme with something that I tell my clients all the time. So Alex, if you can pull that up on the screen, I would appreciate it. And so really, as we're going in, our intention is to help our listeners today identify that any organization or human who asks you to be something you are not is telling you they cannot be trusted. Pay attention to that. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to cut ties with that human or organization, but rather pay attention to what they are telling you. Because I know that during certain times of, like, Mason's in my marriage, because of our cultural norms, because of the social norms, Mason would have supported kind of that erasure of who I was. And we're going to go into that here really quickly. He would have supported it because it was considered the right thing to do. It was considered normal. And so in his support of the erasure of who I was or who I really wanted to be, it didn't mean I needed to cut ties with him. It meant I needed to be able to pay attention so that I could communicate more effectively about that. So did you have anything you want to say before I jump into
I have
the specifics?
A couple questions.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be addressed now. Maybe you'll address it as we go through. But the first question I have is that with this statement, how does that fit into growth? Because, of course, as you're growing, things change. You become a little bit different. Maybe you adopt different characteristics. You adopt different priorities, things like that. And sometimes significantly enough that the person you are today isn't the person you were 10 years ago.
In a good way.
Right. Assuming it's good. Of course, it's not always, but we're talking about growth. So assume that's a good thing. How does that fit into that? Because it almost feels like the statement is saying, don't let somebody else tell you how to change. And I know that you're not advocating for that either.
No, paying attention to that. Maybe I should change this to pay attention and get curious about that. So I can absolutely add that. And I love your question, Mason. I think that as you get curious about why is this organization or human asking me to be something that at my core I'm not.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah.
That as I get curious and pay attention to that, that gives me the ability to then verbalize it and explain it in such a way. Because I would also say about our marriage that as I began to tell you, I'm feeling stuck, I'm feeling isolated, I'm feeling invisible, you were very good at saying, well, what do you need to fix that? And you supported me, whereas most Mormon men would not, in getting my master's degree while I was pulling stay-at-home mom
Right.
duty. You supported me through those practicum and internships, but I didn't start or do things in the order I would have liked to, because I grew up in a high demand religious culture that frowned upon that.
Right.
And so I really want to talk about this. So in the beginning, I kind of want to talk about it at the individual level, which we've kind of already, like foreshadowed for today. And this is the Erasure. What?
One more thing too before you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hot and heavy.
Hot and heavy into it. Ooh, hot and heavy. Okay. X-rated. Just kidding. Is the individualism or the individual erasure. So that my individual humanity was in a way erased because I was expected to conform in order to obtain salvation. So like my eternal happiness depends on my conformation. Okay, I just lost that word. It's confirmation. I think of like laying.
It's conformation. You're right. Confirmation.
Confirmation.
Is
conforming.
Laying on the hands and
conformation. Okay.
Or conforming to something.
Thank you. My words are mixed up.
We just don't use them that closely together all the time. So.
And so I was expected to conform, and I was promised that as I conformed, I would be happier, healthier, safe, blah, 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 blah. And what I actually became was miserable, depressed, increased PTSD symptoms, definitely not safe. Like life threw us a few nasty punches, which it was going to do that anyway. But if I wonder how I may have responded differently to a lot of those life crises if I had been able to be living more authentically to who I am. All right. So Mason, what were you going to say before I get hot and heavy into this?
Well, a couple things. Good morning, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Love you so much. Great to see you here.
Why does it keep doing that? Like it's not plugged in or something?
Yeah, I don't know why it keeps doing that. Like my computer screen is trying to time out, so I'll just keep wiggling the mouse. It's fine.
It's interesting, you talk about how I didn't support you early on, but you also mentioned, of course, you didn't really know what you wanted, or you didn't tell me. And there's a lot of that in a high demand organization where the first law of heaven is obedience, right? You're taught to just do things the way that we say to do them. And there's not a whole lot of, but come to know yourself, get to know who you are, get to know what it is that you want and how you can fit into this picture. They don't want that. It's all about you change yourself to
fit our box,
to inculcate yourself into this religion.
Inculcate.
Where you basically lose yourself, even if you ever found yourself.
Well, but isn't there a scripture that says losing yourself is a good thing?
Yes. Yeah. Jesus said that those that lose themselves will find themselves. Those that find themselves will lose themselves. And it's not very clear. There's lots of different interpretations of that.
Thanks, Jesus. Thanks for being clear as mud.
But I was just thinking about even what you do now as a counselor. I don't know that you had ever had aspirations to be a counselor as a young woman. Really what happened is we ended up with a child who needed something different from us, and you investigated and you learned and
I fell in love with it.
Gained that education in order to help him, and then took it a little further and actually became a counselor. But that's almost again, so this who you are now as a counselor was almost in a way kind of thrust upon you, because if we hadn't made the choice to have kids as early, if we hadn't adopted because we were in a hurry to have kids and we didn't know if we were going to be able to have them, our lives would look a lot different and not necessarily worse or better, but different
Different.
and not necessarily our choice, understanding who we were.
Well, and I think the difference is the accountability piece, because if I had felt free to choose what I wanted
Yes.
and things went south, the ability to be like, oh, my plan didn't work out the way I wanted. Now what? Rather than having to fight that the church said I was supposed to do this, the church made me all these promises. What's the matter with me? Because the church is infallible. And so there's something intrinsically wrong inside of me. And so it really kind of skewed my own personal accountability for owning what was going on in my life.
And high demand religions are really good at that. They make it your fault. Like they set themselves up as this great or perfect organization. So if something's going wrong, it must be you. And that creates that cycle of you constantly coming back to them to try and fix it. When oftentimes the problem is not you. Not that sometimes it isn't, right? We're all growing, we're all learning, but many times it is the organization. And so you're caught in this cycle where you're never going to fix it because your focus is on the wrong person.
Right, absolutely. So, or the organization.
What
Organization,
wrong entity, I think is the word I wanted to use. Wrong entity,
better.
Organization, me, family, whatever. Your focus is on the wrong entity.
So let me get really specific. So story time, everybody, because I think that as I explain this specifically in story form, it will kind of coalesce a little bit better, and that'll set us up better for later. And so Mason, while I'm doing this, I want you to think of what was the individual erasure points for you, because the expectations and the cultural expectations were vastly different for you than they were for me. And it's really actually, I think, easy to see the erasure of the individual feminine person,
much easier,
because of oppression. But what about for you too? So think about that as I tell my story, and then we'll swing back around and talk about that before we go into our next piece. But so I remember the first time I was little, and people were like, okay, what do you want to do with your life? And I had gotten out of, I want to be a princess or a rainbow unicorn, or I'd come down. So we're gonna say probably 11, 12, 13 years old. My dream was to swim with the dolphins at SeaWorld. And when I asked somebody, well, what do I have to do to do that? They lied to me and told me, oh, you would make a great marine biologist. And so for a really long time, I was like, I want to be a marine biologist, but my end goal was to swim with the dolphins at SeaWorld. And really, if that's what I wanted to do, I probably should have taken, extreme swim lessons and performance lessons and whatever, but that's what I wanted to do. But I remember my dad. Now, grace to my dad. I don't think in this moment he was abusive as much as he was following the cultural norm. But my dad was like, well, that's not going to be a good job for you, because you'll have to perform long hours and you won't be able to have children. And so from the time I was 11, 12, 13, when my ideal of what do I want to be when I grow up, there was an expectation that I should get an education. I'm very grateful to my parents for that. My parents both very much valued education. And so I knew I was going to go to college to get an education. But what I was told was the best career for me would be a teacher, because then my work schedule would match that of my children. Yeah. Teachers are always in high demand. So if I took several years off to raise my kids while they were little, that would be okay, because then I could jump right back in to the field and have the same schedule. And that's all well and good. I love teachers. I can either be a great mama or a great teacher. I can't do both. And I know that about myself. And so I felt stuck, but I still got my associate's degree in education, because I had been told from the time I was little that that was basically the only truly acceptable career for a woman to have. And the expectation was that I would get married as soon out of high school as possible, which I did, and that I should have kids within the first 18 months to 2 years of marriage, and that I should be having a kid in my family. The expectation was every 18 months to 2 years. which I did. And to have as many as I could possibly handle, which I did. And so for me, when I look back on those years, I wanted to be in the medical field and I wanted to be like a cardiac surgeon or a general surgeon. I did not want to deliver babies. I did not want to be in hoo-hotties. So I knew I didn't want to be OBGYN, but I wanted to be in the belly, fixing things and saving people's lives. That was my dream career when I was like, that is what I secretly wanted, but I didn't even speak that out loud, not even to Mason, except once I was like, I think it would be a really cool job to be a surgeon. And he was like, yeah, that would be cool. Maybe I could. And he kind of took it. And not because he's a jerk or an asshole, but because the idea of a female being a surgeon was just not, it was not a possibility in my religion, because if I was a surgeon, I could not also be a mother. And it would take so long for me to get through school that I would have to postpone motherhood. And I, probably would have done better doing that single for a lot of that, because I wouldn't have had time to support a marriage. And so but now flip side, Mason can go to medical school and I can be home alone, and that's okay. But me going to medical school and Mason being home alone is not. And so I had that dream and I never had the opportunity to pursue it. Now, most likely what would have happened is I would have gone to school to pursue being a surgeon or whatever, to medical school. And along the way, I would have discovered whether or not that was my true passion. And I could have shifted, because I want to make it abundantly clear. I love my job as a counselor and I love neuroscience. I love the science part. I love filling in that piece. So I am very happy with where I am now. But I postponed everything that I wanted to meet the cultural norm of marriage, wife, child, support your husband, who has to be the sole provider no matter what. And Mason, you better not make your family sacrifice very much. You need to get into this providership and into a career where you make a lot of money so you can support all 9 of your children. Actually, we had 10. We 10. When our family pictures get up, I'll post them, but we've got 10 now. Well, we've always had 10, but they all came home last weekend, y'all. All 10 of our kids were home. They're not all biologically ours. They're not even all legally, like our birth certificate does not appear on all of their birth certificates. But these are the 10 children of the 17 that we have helped raise along the way that we are the closest with. And I was so excited that they were all home last weekend. It was the best weekend ever. I love my family. I love my big family. I feel like for the most part, I really did a great job as a mama. Obviously not a perfect mama, but I broke a lot of generational cycles for sure, which was also a passion of mine. So it's not like the erasure of my individualism or my identity or my authenticity left me miserable forever. But the journey I took to get here would have been different if I had felt like I had the freedom to choose for myself right out of high school. Y'all, I was married at 18 and 2 months. I turned 18 the end of March, and we got married the beginning of June of 1999. So I was an 18-year-old bride. I was still a kid. I look at my oldest kids, and I am so grateful that none of them are married yet, because I want them to live and experience life and grow up and make their mistakes before somebody else is dependent on them, or they're in a committed relationship where they have to be dependent on each other. And I was fully dependent. I went from being fully dependent on my father to fully dependent on Mason. My parents would not let me. And if you read my book, it's 1 year old now, y'all. If you read my book, you can kind of see that level of control of not letting Sarah grow up without a supervisor. I had to have somebody babysit me because apparently I couldn't have survived without you babysitting me. And you did a good job babysitting. Thank you so much. Mwah. All right.
I'm here for you.
There's my story. All right, Mason, what about for you? What are you?
Well, one quick comment on what you said. You said that it following that path that was prescribed for you at some point in time kind of left you miserable. It doesn't do that for everyone, of course. You know, some people really enjoy that path, but it's also hard to tell because if it's a prescribed path, you know, like for me, I tell people all the time, I've never worked a job I didn't like.
Right.
Why haven't I worked a job I didn't like? It's because when I get into that job, I make sure that I have fun. I enjoy it. Would I still want to work at McDonald's right now? Absolutely not. Would I still want to be at the post office? No way. But I loved the jobs when I was
How about
there.
Denny's?
Yeah, I'm totally going back to Denny's.
Going back to Denny's. Gonna cook pancakes.
Right. So
he makes damn
loved
good pancakes, y'all. And I hate pancakes.
I loved them while I was there, but it doesn't. Was that because the job was just incredible, or was it because my personality, or I was taught to just be happy where you are, lift where you stand, kind of a thing?
Right.
And so it's difficult to tell. A lot of people are in Mormonism and appear very happy. And if you ask them, they would genuinely say that they're happy. What would change if the path hadn't been prescribed?
Right.
Would they still be in the same situation? The irony is, you know, they told you that you couldn't be a surgeon because you couldn't also be a mom. Lots of female doctors out there, surgeons being moms.
And rocking it.
Not in the way that Mormonism necessarily prescribes, but rocking it. Yeah, they're doing a good job as moms and being professionals.
And providers, right? Well,
but there was no ability for you to really pursue that because it was quashed early, because what is the highest thing that a woman can be in Mormonism?
A mother.
There isn't anything higher.
Well, and, you know, I've been watching the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Oh my gosh, y'all. Middle school catty women trying to buck patriarchy. It's toxic, and it is not a representation of most Mormon women. I'm gonna say that, although I would love to be like, yes, look at this and how terrible Mormonism is. No, that's something extra. That is not a good representation of most Mormon women. However, something that is representative of Mormonism is most of them talk about being married by age 19.
Yeah.
Your brains aren't even fully formed yet. And they say that over and over. I think every single episode is like, and your brain's not even formed. And your brain's not even formed. And one of the things that happens is when you jump into certain things before your brain is ready for it, you get stuck at a teenage developmental level. And I'm watching this show and they're like, my brain hasn't formed yet. And I'm like, and it shows. You're stuck. You're stuck at being catty, teenage, gossipy, bitches.
Well, frankly, once you become a parent,
right,
it takes so much of who you are,
right,
that it's hard to.
They're just so Mormonism and a lot of other religions are like teenage brides, and you know what? Occasionally it works out great, but when you're looking statistically, I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but they're not good for marriage in general. And then you add in the complications of being married so young. And I remember when we got married, people were like, oh, Sarah's too young. They're not ready. That marriage will fail, blah, blah, blah. We're at 25 years now. And I would say we're doing pretty good, but we're also not the norm. We are not the norm in that most. And I mean, let me tell you right now, I put our marriage through things that very well could have ended in divorce. Read that. And we're still together, but again, we are in the minority of those statistics, not the majority of those statistics. So yeah, it's really important for our kiddos to grow up, figure out who they are and what they love, experience some life, stumble and fall when it's not as huge of a deal. I mean, like we were buying our first house when I was 19 years old, y'all. We had to short sell that house. We did not have the financial maturity to be owning a house yet. I look back at that time period, and because we were pushed into adulthood and parenthood so fast. I'm actually grateful today that I struggled with infertility because that slowed that ship way down. And we were married almost 3 years, right? Before Eric joined us.
2
years,
A little over two.
2.5 years. Yeah. Yeah. A little over 2 years before Eric joined us. And I'm really grateful that we got the opportunity to adopt Eric, because when I finally did get pregnant, holy hell, I'm not good pregnant. Like, I'm a basket case pregnant. So
and mostly it comes down to choice. Yeah, just like, was it my choice? Not really, right? So,
right. And so again, Mason, before you share your story, I want to, why does it say remove? Okay, there it goes. Remember, any organization or human who asks you to be something you are not, or maybe even not ready to be, is telling you they cannot be trusted. Get curious and pay attention to that. I'm adding get curious in there.
I would even maybe change it to from who asks you to be something else, but who tells you to be something you're not. Because a lot of these organizations like Mormonism, they're telling you to be something that you aren't necessarily.
Well, you tell your story. I'm going to
update
the meme and send it out to Alex so we can have it. We're just going to keep changing it with you, and then the finalized version will go up on social media.
Well, that's kind of the cool thing about things like that, is you have an idea, and then as you work through it, you're like, oh yeah, that could change, whatever. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on my individual stuff because we want to talk about groups and cultures, but some of the things that came up, a job, a lot of what my options for a job might have been were restricted simply because I was taught that I needed to be able to support a family and right away. I was home from my mission less than a year before I was married. And so I don't have any education. I don't have the ability to really take care of a family. But the Mormonism very much pushes, don't wait on a family for education. Don't wait on a family for financial stability. You start your family and then things will work out. You do things our way and everything will come together. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But my job was restricted because I had to find something that I could support my family in.
Right. You were not allowed. It was almost like this expectation of you needed to make a lot of money because you'd grown up so poor.
Well, I don't know that there was an expectation that I should make a lot of money, but I obviously needed to make enough to support a family. And there is kind of the undertone that if you're being righteous, that you'll be successful. And while that's not necessarily a blatant teaching, it's absolutely there. It's absolutely an undertone at the very least. So if you're not successful, then maybe you're not being as righteous as you should be. The other thing was just my individuality was lost into the religion itself. That became an aspect, just became became a part of every aspect of my life. And that wasn't really obvious until I left.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm floundering to try and figure out what's important to me and what, where my priorities are. And even if I would make some of the same choices again, one of the things was family. I wasn't ready to be a parent when we had Eric. I wasn't really ready to be a parent probably when we had any of our children. And some of that was just me, but I needed some growing up to do too. And so when you got thrust into that, I think there's still a little bit of underlying resentment just from everything that we were asked to.
Towards me or towards the church?
No, just in general. For and probably that's directed at the church, but it's quietly directed at the church, that because we were quote unquote forced, like we weren't forced, but quote unquote forced into starting a family early, getting things going right away, having kids right away. It's funny, we had decided that we were going to wait for a little while.
Alex, I emailed you the updated meme. If you could swap those out while Mason's telling his story, that would be awesome. Keep going.
Just, what choices would be different. Like we had decided that when we got married, we were going to wait for a while to have kids. And then after like a month, we thought you might be pregnant. So we had this big long conversation. Well, we'll stop waiting. We're a month into being married and we're going to stop waiting.
I kept him up all night picking baby names.
Yeah.
All night, y'all.
But that's how quickly things changed. And so, but
Right.
it wasn't because we wanted to start having kids. It was because that's what we've been taught.
Well, and our families were giving us a lot of grief about getting pregnant. All right, this is Mason's thing. Alex is
So
back, by
this
the way.
is from Back to the Future. If you haven't seen it, Back to the Future 1, where because he's in the past and he kind of messed up some timelines, his existence is in question. And so right at the end there, he starts to see his hand is fading because he's fading. The picture that has him in there, it's fading. And I think that it can be, in a lot of ways, leaving a high demand organization looks a little bit like this, where you start to see yourself and you start to wonder, who the hell am I?
Right.
And am I really who I was? Like, for instance, I loved being a bishop. Is that who I am, or is that just what was thrust upon me, kind of a thing?
Well, and you were very different as a bishop than you were as a human at home. Like, you almost performed, I feel like, as a bishop in order to meet the expectations of what a bishop was supposed to be. And then you would come home and you'd be like, ugh, I can just be me again. But I don't think you would have identified that you were miserable. But like, it was like, okay, I can shed this expectation and I'm going to be really grumpy towards my family because, yeah.
And obviously not deliberately, and I
not deliberately.
wasn't performing per se, but there was extra effort going into it because I can't fail. You know, you can't be a bishop and then fail as a bishop.
Because everybody has to follow what you say, and if you tell somebody something wrong,
right, or if they lose their salvation, they become inactive because of something I say or do.
It's on you as the bishop.
On me.
What a huge amount of responsibility.
Right. It's not much different than my kids. You know, if your kids become inactive or run off and become hoodlums or whatever, everybody's going to look at the parents. Our kids are who they are. So yeah, a lot of pressure. And while I enjoyed it, I don't know if that is who I am. How would I know?
Right.
You know, it was a calling, and
yeah,
I accepted it gladly because it was a calling. So anyway,
okay.
Let's move on to
all right.
cultural.
So our next erasure is, I put down group erasure, a specific group of people. And so this is where we would talk about like issues with feminism or issues with racism. And really the group that I chose for us to talk about today is the LGBTQ plus population. And I'm really grateful that we walked away from the church when we did, because it was right at the same time as one of our kiddos was beginning to recognize that some of the nuances in their sexual attraction and arousal didn't fit the norm. And so we've got a kiddo that identifies as LGBTQ plus. And that kiddo, I don't think she minds if I share. So Katie, because she's shared it publicly, so we should be good. And if not, I'm fucked. No, she's shared it with everybody. So Katie is
well, just don't share the details.
Right, I'm not going to share the details, but she identifies as part of it. Oh, thank you, Alex. She did mention it on the show. Woohoo! But anyway, she is part of that LGBTQ plus population, and she was really beginning to struggle with the teachings. Like, again, what's wrong with me? And then the idea that she was expected to keep that bottled up inside, secretive, nobody's allowed to know. And
even to the point of hopefully snuffing it out.
Right. To the point of, I really hope
making
that this
yourself not that
goes away
yeah.
eventually. And that was, she started to have really bad anxiety. She would close herself in, and she's a lot like her dad in that way that, just leave me alone. I'm going to keep it inside. I don't want to talk about my feelings. but to this extra level, because it not only do I not want to talk about my feelings, but I can't talk about what's going on for me because in the church it's bad. And I remember when she told us, she was really like, when she came out of the closet to us, one of the things that she came in and she goes, Mom, you're not allowed to say anything, but I want to let you know that I am. And then she identified her sexual orientation and she goes, bye. And she walked out of the room and went to bed. And I was like, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell Mason or not. I haven't. So I was like, heads up.
Well,
Katie said this. Be
me,
prepared for when she tells you.
when she did tell me, she did it exactly the same way. She said that and walked away.
Then
which I respect, because at that point in time, I don't think she had any indication of how I would react. She probably had a pretty good indication of how you would react, but she didn't have any indication of how I would react.
She also flipped me off. She goes, hey, Mom, I'm this. Love ya. And then walked away. And I was like, ah! And that was how that ended. That was her identity, and the church, this high demand organization, which you still see this in society. You see this across many religions. You see this amongst many countries where it's still illegal. Yeah. And that erasure of who she is, that is how I believe very strong. That's how she was made. And any God that makes you a certain way and then says, keep it secret, don't talk about it. Oh, and if you act on these feelings, you can't come home to me, is an asshole of a daddy. Yeah. I'm just going to say that right now. Like, as a parent, I cannot imagine doing that to my children. Well, oh, go ahead. And when you look at in the Mormon church, what the expectations are of the LGBTQ plus community, it's again, conform to our way of doing things, marry out of an obligation, no matter what your sexual orientation or gender identity is. It doesn't matter.
Because you can't go to heaven either way.
Because you can't go to heaven unless you do it our way. And it creates misery. It creates misery. All right, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that, she was 15 years old. She's still figuring out who she is.
She was 14 or
15. 14. She's still figuring out who she is. But when you have to figure it out alone, when you have to figure it out with the enmity of your parents or your friends
or your church group
or your school group, like it changes everything about the process. And so whatever she ends up figuring out for herself, she's able to do it with us being aware, us being right here, supporting her,
right,
talking her through what's going on. Right. She can communicate with us rather than, bottling it up. Why does so much sexual sin happen in the church? A lot of it is because we can't talk about it.
Right. We can't talk about
what you're feeling.
And the normal sexual development things that every human goes through along their growing up. And I'm going to say something as a counselor here in a minute. As you're growing up, all of that has to fit within point A to point B on the spectrum that is endless. So one of the things, as a counselor, I'm going to share this for educational purposes only, and that is that our sexual orientation and our gender identity is on a spectrum. And during our teen years, there's this myth that, it changes back and forth and kids are just everywhere. No, that's not true. It is normal during those years as you're developing for you to move along that spectrum. That is a normal, natural thing. It doesn't mean that you go from gay to straight as much as it means I'm feeling different levels of arousal, different intensities, different everything, because it goes on a spectrum. And as you get older, that spectrum tends to close up until you find this is my comfort zone, moving back and forth on this spectrum of sexual orientation. And if you're on the heterosexual side of that spectrum, then your movement in that spectrum is all within what a lot of religions would consider normal, healthy, righteous, good, whatever. And if you're on the LGBT end of this spectrum, your fluidity might be a little bit more dynamic. And that's normal, that is natural, but because your area of this is where I am on the spectrum, bouncing back and forth between where my limits and boundaries and level of comfort are, level of comfort is, anyway, whatever. That's going to be outside the, and I, please, if you're listening, I'm using air quotes here, outside of the norm, therefore bad, evil, ugly,
Right.
not okay. And really what we need to look at is biology is complicated. There is no one set way that humans are. And so sexual orientation and gender identity, number one, is a social construct, in my opinion. And we can talk about that another day, probably on my Unpacking with Sarah show, but not today. But there is that spectrum there, and both spectrums are fluid. And you see a lot of movement up and down that spectrum in your teenagers. This is why teenagers experiment with different things, and then they're able to walk away and be like, "Ooh, I like that. Ooh, I did not like that." And you figure out where those boundaries and levels of comfort on the spectrum are. And as you get older, you get more comfortable within the areas that, and you're able to identify, this is my boundary, this is my boundary, anything outside of that is not fun for me, therefore I'm going to stay within this fluid portion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are you trying to say that you might not be able to think clearly with raging hormones? Is that what's going on?
Well, I don't think clearly, I don't feel clearly, I don't emote clearly, and my spiritual connection is all over the place. Like nothing is firing smoothly in that teenage brain. And too often parents are saying that myth, or educators or spiritual leaders, which is, give it 5 minutes, it'll change. They're not really on the LGBTQ spectrum. It's just a phase. It's whatever. They're just trying to be like their friends. No, they are moving naturally throughout that developmental spectrum. You just need to back off and let them figure it out. Are there social influences? Yeah, absolutely. But not to the point of I'm faking it so I can fit in. That's rare. All right.
Right. I'm not socially going to be gay. I'm not socially going to be straight.
I mean, I'm sure
I might behave that way because,
right,
especially on the straight side, because the community just tends to support.
Well, and I'm sure there are a very select few kiddos who are like, I'm this because of social pressure to fit in. But again, it's rare, but that's also normal as a teenager to be like,
Right.
I'm going to do this to fit in.
Right. They
but
change
the
their
vast
opinions about all kinds of stuff.
The vast majority of teenagers that identify as LGBTQ plus after the age of 14 are going to continue to identify as LGBTQ plus as adults with varying degrees of where their boundaries, comfort level on that spectrum. So what we need to do is just remove all of the social expectations off that spectrum. We'll let people figure it out and accept them for who they are, where they are. Yeah. All right. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
The point of the group Erasure is that Mormonism wants to talk about how they're accepting of everybody, but that's BS. It's just not true.
Right. We will accept you as LGBTQ if.
Right. An example being the LGBTQ community. They want to talk about how, yeah, we want everybody here. It's okay for you to be gay in the church, but you can't actually be gay in the church.
Right.
Like, you cannot say you're gay, but you better not be acting on it.
You are not allowed to express your sexual
You better not be
side.
wanting dates. Better not be kissing same sex. You certainly better not be talking about marriage with the same sex, right?
Well, because they believe you can't get married and therefore sexual sin. But now it doesn't matter if you're married as a gay man or woman and you're having sex. That's still wrong according to the church.
Right.
So,
well, going back to your quote, the quote thing that you wrote there, if they're asking you or telling you to be something that you're not, yes.
Yeah, pull up my meme again, Alex,
in this case, they're saying, okay, you can be gay, but you really can't be gay. Because you can't express what gayness is. You can't walk down the street holding somebody's hand like you can in a heterosexual relationship, married, dating, whatever. That's completely okay.
Right.
But you can't do that as a gay person. That's an expression of something that is not okay.
Bad,
it's wrong.
evil,
yes,
horrible,
it's evil. You're living a lifestyle that's not in God's standards. And so they can say they want to support you, that they want you there. But the reality is they want you to change.
Right, because they put limits on it. And those limits erase a part of who you are.
Right.
as a member of the LGBTQ plus.
So, right. So you could be a part of our church, but you better be a silent part.
You have to
be a
fit.
silent part.
You can have these feelings and these emotions and these urges, but you need to stuff them into this little box or this little bubble. And if you step outside of that bubble, then you are going to lose your eternal salvation, and it's going to be all your fault because you acted in a way that is authentic to who you are and how the Sky Daddy made you, if there's a Sky Daddy.
Right.
All right. Exactly. I think we did that one well. Do you have anything else you want to say on group?
I don't think so. I think that we've explained it
all
pretty
right.
well.
So now let's talk about cultural erasure. Also something very specific and common.
I looked this one up, by the way. There's actually a name for it. It's called ethnocide or cultural genocide.
Ooh,
and I think it holds a greater power when you can call it that, because we're all familiar with the idea of genocide, where you're basically trying to kill a whole group of people. In this case, you're trying to kill something very specific about a whole group of people.
You just blew my mind with that word, actually. And this is where, like, Brene Brown quotes the study that if you open up your vocabulary with your emotions and stuff, you're able to express yourself more specifically, and that adds this huge amount of benefit in your verbal communications. This word just did that for me.
I think it's a powerful word because it really speaks to what we're going to be talking about.
Well, and I'm not a history buff. Okay, let me just put that out there. Blanket statement. I'm not a history buff. And so I know that our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Jewish humans in the world, have had people try and take away their culture and their ethnicity for eons and eons and eons. If you look into the Middle East, you see a lot of this. As far as religions go, this is one where Mormons are going to be like, yeah, we didn't do that. But they did, and they do, in the sense that the Book of Mormon is supposed to be a literal, historically accurate record of the quote unquote Lamanites, and the Lamanites are the humans that make up the Lamanites, quote unquote Lamanites, are our Native Americans and our South Americans,
according to
Mormonism. So basically, your darker skinned American population, and that ethnocide is vast. I remember I dated a young man the last year of high school who was from the Navajo Nation in northeastern Arizona, and he truly believed that his heritage was the story of Nephi and Lehi and Laman and Lemuel and Sam from the Book of Mormon. And we now have DNA evidence that proves that that's not the case. Well, my question is, how much of his Native American heritage was lost? Because in northeastern Arizona, the Navajo and Apache nations were saturated with Mormon culture. And so how much of their actual heritage is completely gone?
Yeah, can I pause you for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, love you, Curtis, from my book. If you're listening, that's my Native American. Love you so much, and hope you don't mind me sharing your story. I did change your name.
I want to just take one quick moment to say that this is a world problem.
Oh, yes.
Like, erasure of culture has happened an infinite number of times in an infinite number of countries. And so this isn't like Mormonism came up with this and you need to stop it. This is recognizing that there's an issue in humanity, essentially, where we want to take over and inculcate everyone into the way that we do things. That's a humanity issue. The problem is, and the reason we address it with Mormonism, is there's this idea of prophets.
Right.
There's this idea that they speak with God. There's this idea that what they say is from God or is sponsored or approved by God. And if you're going to make that claim, you can't be bigoted the way that they are. You
Mhm.
can't be erasing cultures the way that they are, because, well, that comes down to the idea.
Because it's wrong.
Well, that comes to the idea, does God even exist? A lot of this cultural erasure has been done in the name of God. So it's
Right.
not even that part's not a new
Right.
concept.
Why would
but it's about
God create you in this specific way only so that everything valuable about that is taken?
right. Well, let me just give you
with with the white missionary effect or the white privilege. Our way is better than yours, and you need to conform. Conformity is natural for us. We want to conform in our groups and our tribes, but it's dangerous when it is taking away your authenticity.
Well, and for the most part, that conformity is forced because survival is a question. Now, let me just give you 3 quick
Oh, I
examples.
like that. Survival is the question, because you're not talking about day-to-day survival. You're talking about existential survival, correct?
No, I'm actually talking about day-to-day survival.
Ooh, okay, go ahead.
So, if you look at the Old Testament, when Moses led the Israelites to what is now Israel, the commandment was, you're going to go in and you're going to wipe everybody else out. Everybody that is there, they need to go. So you're completely erasing those cultures. And why? Because they didn't want to be tainted by whatever they had, specifically their religions
and their whiteness.
But they didn't want to be tainted by anything that they had. And so there was an authorized, quote unquote, by God commandment, go in there. In fact, they were punished and criticized when they didn't complete that task. By God, they were punished and criticized, the Israelites. When they went in and they didn't finish clearing everybody out, God got after them and said, this isn't okay, and now you're going to get punished for this. The other one is that once Christianity became the real thing in the European culture, I mean, you're talking about all the Spanish Inquisition. You're talking about the church saying, if we don't like what you're doing,
right,
you're gone. We're going to kill you. We're going to burn you with a stake.
History buff, by the way. That's him, not me.
The Salem witch trials, where people were killed because they were doing something that the church didn't like.
Right.
And then the final one that I have is Native Americans in America. When Columbus showed up, and then of course everybody else, it was either I'm going to take everything, like Cortez came in and just took,
obliterated, right?
But even when they were not trying to just kill the Indians, they were trying to convert the Indians. That was their main objective, was to teach them Christianity, to immediately take away from them. Because anybody that is fully into a religion, it's a big part of your life.
Right.
So now you're taking, you're not even acceptable unless you can accept our religion, because it's the real one, and you need to get rid of all that crap that you've believed for hundreds and thousands of years.
Right. Well, and what you're saying makes me think about how much the Latina culture and the Native American culture were so used to being battered down by all these white privileged men and women who went in and said our way is better. I mean, eventually you're going to break, you're going to conform, and I like that, for your actual survival. But then how much is lost? And the challenge that I have is, in the church, they're like, we support your religious culture, we support your heritage, and we have these great big pageants to show you how much we support your heritage. But what are they doing to help them regain the heritage that was taken or lost? Like, there are very few people alive today that remember the old ways because of conformity. And one of the things that I hate about Mormonism is that they did it and felt like it's okay. So if you're led by God, it must be okay to erase your cultural heritage. And they did it to the African American culture here in the United States. We've talked about that in our racism episode. In the 70s, I'm going to say between the 70s and the millennium, 70s South America was the highest baptism area, and just millions of people joining the Mormon church during that time. Like they would send hundreds of Mormon missionaries there because it was such a successful baptism area. And they were told the story of, and adopted, those ones that joined, adopted the story of Nephi, Laman, Lemuel, Sam, Lehi. Notice 5 men, of course. Oh, and their mom, Sariah. She was in there once or twice. They adopted that as their truth, as this is my heritage. And now here we are, a couple hundred years later going, I don't think so, because there's no DNA evidence that supports that. And then today we're doing that in Africa. Like we're sending hundreds, the Mormon church is sending hundreds of missionaries to Africa to convert them to Mormonism and telling them that their ways of living prior to the white missionary effect coming in is wrong, bad, evil. How much of that beautiful culture is being taken? So really quickly before Mason comments, I want to remind our listeners, we love hearing from you. You're welcome to comment in the comment section. Today we kind of jumped on really early, so I'm not surprised that we don't have a lot of live viewers, because we are about an hour earlier than we normally do our show, because Mason and I have to go finish getting our other house ready to put on the market. But we would love to, as you're watching this later, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. You can visit our website at daisygirlcommunications.com. You can also reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, those places. We would love to hear from our audience. Please do that. Also, if you'd like to donate a few bucks to our show, or a lot of bucks to our show to help us pay our production team, we do that at Venmo, and that's at Daisy Girl Communications. So there's that Venmo. You see me with my podcast stuff on there and the butterfly logo in the top. And so we love to hear from our listeners. We absolutely love interacting with our audience. And I'm hoping that maybe by the end of next year, we'll do some live call-ins. Perhaps if we've got the listenership for our live shows Sunday morning, we normally air every other Sunday at 10 in the morning. As we can get that down more consistent, we might even open things up for live phone calls into the show. And we are really excited about the possibility of adding that to our show. So thank you so much. All right, Mason, go ahead with your thought.
I was going to say, you mentioned pageants, right? And how the church they tout that as a celebrating the culture of these people.
Right.
Well, I would ask you, which cultures have they celebrated? And the answer, unless I'm very much mistaken, is one. And the only reason one, aside from just whitedom, aside from their own, really just their Americanized white culture.
White
aside
privilege.
From that, the only culture that they've ever celebrated is the Native American culture, but only so much as it pertains to the Book of Mormon.
Right.
It only gets celebrated because they consider it part of their heritage because of the Book of Mormon. Otherwise, there's no celebration of that culture at all. That would not be celebrated. It would be erased just like anything else, just like any other culture. It would be gone, but they hold on to it because they feel it's a part of them. So It's not a celebration of your culture. It's a celebration of my culture.
I would actually go as far as to say it's a celebration of Mormonism coming in and taking their culture away because the white Jesus came to visit. So I remember watching the Hill Cumorah pageant several times growing up, because my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa T, lived in New York for most of, all of my growing up years.
Right.
And up until about 5 or 10 years, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when they sold their cabin in the Adirondack Mountains because they were just too old to be traveling back and forth between New York and Arizona all the time. But they used to make that trek. They spent summers in New York and winters in Arizona for as long as I can remember. And I would go to that Hill Cumorah pageant with my family, and it was beautifully done. It's a great play. It was a fun pageant. But now as an adult looking back, they celebrate this, culture as they prescribed from the Book of Mormon, and then you celebrate the fact that Jesus and the missionaries are coming in and taking that away from you.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that I really want to focus on is the pretend heritage, like the story of Lehi and Nephi and Samuel the Lamanite and who else? Ammon and all of these, Book of Mormon prophets, because I grew up thinking that they were true. That's my heritage growing up. And to find out that the heritage and the where Sarah came from, and to be proud of that, was all based on a lie. My heritage is fake. It's Joseph Smith's creation.
That part of it anyway, yeah.
Right? It was a devastating blow when I left the church. It was, well, who am I and where do I actually come from? And I've had to reframe that a lot to be like, my heritage, my religious heritage came from my grandparents desperately trying to keep their marriage together and my grandfather trying to overcome his alcoholism, and that he was successful in that because of these inspiring stories. They took them literal. I don't have to take them literal. And Mormon culture was the structure where I learned to be honest, even though I really didn't in Mormonism. That one's probably a bad one for me. I learned to lie for the Lord really good in Mormonism. So I wouldn't say honesty, integrity came because of my Mormon heritage, but my willingness to serve, the way that I love others, those types of things about me that I'm really proud of. I had an opportunity to grow in Mormonism, and I'm really grateful that I have repotted myself. I've transplanted myself into a healthier, more nutrient rich soil. It's almost like I went from Miracle Grow, which only lasts, says so right on the bag, 6 months, to being planted into Mother Earth, into the ground where the nutrients replenish itself as we take care of the earth so that I can grow differently. It actually reminds me very much of my apple tree. Alex, if you could pull up the picture of our apple tree from the show we did the other day, that would be great. And we can pull it up here. So this is the first time in our marriage that we have had healthy fruit trees on our land. So here is my Jonathan apple tree. As you can see, doesn't that look like the puzzle we're working on right now, Mason? It really does. So anyway, and it's not our house, but one of the things I love about this apple tree, this Jonathan apple tree, is that those apples, like I go out and I pick it from the tree and I begin to eat it, and I feel so much peace, and I feel a difference in the nutrients. And maybe it's psychological. I don't think it is. I think my body is recognizing that this is the healthiest kind of apple you can get. But this is the first time Mason and I have ever owned fruit trees that produced healthy fruit. And I am a firm believer that the previous owner who planted this apple tree, because they built everything out here, so they would have planted this apple tree. They were obviously, based on the way that my land looks, very good gardeners. And they took the time to make sure that this apple tree had the nutrients it needed, that the soil was well taken care of, that it got pruned appropriately. It's a little bit overgrown right now because they got very old, but it is very obvious to me that they did a great job of nurturing this tree from a youngling, sapling probably, to where it is now, where it's producing so many apples that we cannot even consume them. And we're not sad that the hornets are eating them from the inside out. It's actually pretty fascinating to watch that and to just watch this life cycle. And I feel like that's how we are as humans. Thank you so much, Alex. You can take the tree away if you want. As I've transplanted out of my Miracle Grow pot, where the environment was so controlled that I may have looked great, but as soon as my owner went out of town for a little while, or as soon as the cat decided to pee in me instead, I would have wilted and died. It was a fake healthy state. And that when I left Mormonism, I transplanted myself into the earth. And for a little while, I looked really weak. I looked like I was going to die, but that as I partake of the healthy nutrition that is naturally in the environment around me, as I expand my view and my root system out, that I am getting healthier and the fruit that I'm producing is much more beautiful. Maybe my first year or two of fruit looked pretty spotted and nasty, and my skin was too rough, and I would drop my fruit before it was ready, those types of things. Absolutely. I struggled for a little while because transplanting is hard, and many plants don't live through the transplant process. It takes a skilled gardener or a lucky one. Sometimes I'm just lucky to make that transition, but I'm so grateful that I did, because I feel like the view on the other side of the bubble is glorious. And I don't need the organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to tell me what is good and bad, because I can tell for myself. If I bite into an apple that does not taste good, I don't need the church to tell me it's a rotten apple. I know it's a rotten apple, either by looking at it or I bite into it and I'm like, whew, this one's mealy, and I toss it to the donkey because he really likes the mealy ones.
Frankly, when it comes to moral issues, they like to say that they're
right. They've copyrighted all moral issues.
They're top dog when it comes to that. But religion in general has a poor history of being
right.
morals, of having real moral superiority.
I like that.
So much of what they consider morality has changed over the years that it's just not, they're just not correct in that. You know, some of the things that they tout, they're good things for sure.
Right. They gave me the way that I value my family and the importance I place upon my family definitely came from my Mormon heritage.
Well, it did for you, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't have come from something else if you
Absolutely.
weren't there, right? So It's not exclusive to Mormonism, but it is where you got it from, and we can be grateful for those things.
Right.
But I mean, look at social issues in general, and Mormonism is just way behind.
Yeah, I would agree. They're behind the times, and they are still erasing our individual humanity. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before I close us out?
I don't think so.
Okay. If you would like to learn how to earn this very amazing insulated mug, I have one. You can either get it in white or black. White has the Daisy Girl Communications logo on it. The black one has the Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. If you want to learn how to earn one of these lovely pieces of merchandise, please email me at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com, and I will tell you how you can earn a free insulated mug. These are expensive. They're like $30 if you buy them on my store. And the reason is because they cost me like $28 to have them made. They will keep my coffee hot. Literally, there's still coffee in this, and it is still nice and hot as if it was fresh out of my coffee machine. Probably until 2:00 this afternoon, and I made the first batch at 6 and drank it all before it got cool. My neighbor says this is the best insulated mug she has ever had, and whenever she breaks the lid or her kids threw it out the window once, she's like, I need another one, and I was able to replace it for her. So if you would like one of these, please email us at daisygirlcommunications, it's plural, @gmail.com, and learn how you can earn one. In closing, I would like to reiterate, we perfected the meme live today on the show. So if you missed that, please go back and watch. Any organization or human who tells you to be something you are not is demonstrating they cannot be trusted. Pay attention and get curious about that. Said by me. I think I'm very wise in that moment when we created that here together. Mason, thank you for adding your wisdom in. I should probably put your name in there too. Give you some street creds for that. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you probably in 2 weeks. It just depends on Mason's call schedule, if we can record or not. But we will let you know. And thank you again. As always, hang on one sec. As always, if you or somebody you know is in crisis, you can contact the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-CHILD. If you are wanting to unalive yourself or know somebody that is, please call or text 988. I have done it before. They were amazing. And our domestic violence hotline number is 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233. All right, Mason, go ahead.
Mine that goes along with that is that any organization that says they have one answer for everyone is conning you.
Hey, that's the meme I was talking about earlier this morning, that any organization that says they have the one and only right answer for everybody is conning you. And I would absolutely say that Mormonism fits that, as do many other religions and organizations, including politics, which we don't talk about. We don't talk about no politics. No. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. And we will see you next time if you missed the live show. Thank you for your likes, your hearts, and please subscribe below. Bye.